I wanted to make a few comments and observations after watching Rationality Rules' 3-part dissection of Prager's master class. These observations revolve around 4 assertions made by Prager himself. The first is that societies that, quote, become too secular come to an end.
If society gets too secular, it ends. That's right, it ends.
The second is the idea that without faith in God, morality is an optional sideshow.
In the last episode, we delved into the sociology of morality, addressing Dennis's claim that if God doesn't say love your neighbour, then it's nothing more than a vapid, vacuous, sweet suggestion.
If God doesn't say love your neighbor as yourself, it doesn't mean a damn thing. It's just a sweet suggestion.
Oh, come on! Look at that face!
If there is no God who says do not steal or do not murder, stealing and murder are not wrong. That doesn't mean that people who don't believe in God will necessarily steal and murder. Of course you can think that stealing is wrong, and you can feel that murder is wrong if you don't believe in God. But it's just what you think and what you feel. It's your opinion. They're not objectively wrong. There's no objective moral truth if there is no God. That's the whole point. It's not an attack, it's just a fact.
Third,
next consequence of secularism: the death of communal life. You may not have thought of that one.
Yeah, for good reason, Dennis.
But I have a very simple way of illustrating this. What secular groups get together on a weekly basis?
Seriously, Dennis.
Because religious people do. I get together with my community every Sabbath.
Oh yeah, this guy is the life of the party, I can tell. Gotta get invites everywhere.
Well, you've got to hand it to Dennis. That is an impressively ignorant question to ask, and especially with such self-satisfaction.
I've always known Dennis as a sad sack, but yeah, he really deserves the mockery he gets for that statement.
And as for me, damn, where do I start? Eating babies, that's a really fun meetup. Sodomy, not together, of course. The former's on Thursdays and the latter's on Fridays. Then there's abortion party Wednesdays, and yes, that's where we get the food for Thursdays. Oh, and how could I forget? Champagne and caviar with the Marxists on Tuesdays. We are, I assure you, very much down with the proletariat. So yeah, you know, basic atheist things, really.
And last but not least, Dennis couldn't help making one more teensy little claim. It's really his best work, I think.
So let me give you some data from the National Institutes of Health, National Library of Medicine. Data suggests that adherence to religious beliefs is associated with lower rates of suicide. Would you say that that's significant? A number of factors have been hypothesized to explain this association, including enhanced social support, less substance abuse, and lower rates of psychopathology. That's all. That's all religion gives you. Let's review that. Enhanced social support, less substance abuse, and lower rates of psychopathology. That's pretty powerful.
Do you want to know what's actually pretty powerful? Showing the title of one study, namely Religion and Suicide, New Findings, but when zooming in, showing an abstract from a completely different study. A study titled Religious Beliefs Buffer the Impact of Depression on Suicide Ideation. To make this clearer, here on the left you can see the study that Dennis reads the title of, and on the right you can see the abstract of a completely different study he zooms into.
That's all.
Except it's not all, is it, Dennis? Because you didn't just read a completely different abstract, but evidently added your own paragraph to it. Yeah. Here on the left is what the actual study's abstract states, whereas here on the right is the screenshot Dennis shows and reads out to his audience. You can even see above his added paragraph that it's the same abstract. It's even got the same font, same hex colors, and the same keywords. So did Dennis and his team add their own text to a study to bolster their case? Are they seriously that crooked? Well, if we check the Wayback Machine, we can see that the site hasn't changed since it was published, which is standard for studies. And if we Google the text that Dennis and the Daily Wire have added, we can see just one result comes up. But get this, it's from yet another study, a study titled Religiosity as a Protective Factor Against Suicidal Behaviour. A study whose conclusion reads, religiosity has a protective effect against suicide attempts, which is independent of social functioning, psychopathology, and substance use. But what Dennis did was take the objective and then paste it into another study to present it as if it's the conclusion, and to then paste both of these slices under the title of a third study.
Would you say that that's significant?
Yes, I would. In fact, I'd say that it's a damn disgrace. I cannot understate how unethical and immoral this is. The paper they steal the objective from even states, contrary to Dennis, that there were no differences in social functioning or rates of psychopathology among the study groups.
And lower rates of psychopathology.
So there you have it, folks. Dennis and the Daily Wire were so desperate to justify their bigotry that they've cherry-picked a title from one study, an abstract from another study, and digitally stitched in the objective from yet another study as to present it as a conclusion.
That's all.
That is fucking absurd. Utterly breathtaking. Look, I can understand if you disagree with me, but if you endorse this level of manipulation, God help you, because your conscience sure as hell can't.
If the faithful are going to argue that belief in God is essential to moral behavior and existential to civilization itself, they would be far more convincing if they themselves demonstrated the seriousness of their argument. Wikipedia, of course, has a fairly extensive page on the Ninth Commandment. And for background, I am going to quote a few passages from it, because I think it's worth understanding just how serious false witness was treated, at least within the context of the Bible, in terms of Christianity and Judaism. So here it goes. First, the context. The command against false testimony is seen as a natural consequence of the command to love your neighbor as yourself. This moral prescription flows from the command for holy people to bear witness to their deity. Offenses against the truth express by word or deed a refusal to commit oneself to moral uprightness. They are fundamental infidelities to God, and, in this sense, they undermine the foundations of covenant with God. The Hebrew Bible contains a number of prohibitions against false witness, lying, spreading false reports, etc. For a person who had a charge brought against them and were brought before a religious prosecution, the charge was considered as established only on the evidence of 2 or 3 sworn witnesses. In cases where false testimony was suspected, the religious judges were to make a thorough investigation, and if false testimony were proven, the false witness was to receive the punishment he had intended to bring on the person falsely accused. For example, since murder was a capital crime, giving false testimony in a murder case was subject to the death penalty. Those eager to receive or listen to false testimony were also subject to punishment.
It's not a talk about how true religion is. It is about the consequences of the death of religion, and they are completely and totally nihilistic and destructive to the individual and to society.
My answer is that no, Dennis, it's not a lack of faith in God that causes a civilization to fall, but rather the bad faith of actors within a society. It ceases to be able to distinguish fact from fantasy. And if challenges come up in society, it will simply fail to address them. In violating the Ninth Commandment on points 3 and 4, Dennis Prager has undermined his own point too. The short form of this, of course, is that U.S. conservatives are not seriously religious people. They would not be conducting themselves in this way, in so many ways, if they were, because they would be operating on the premise that their mortal souls were at stake, when clearly they have no such concerns. So I gotta say this much for those of you who follow Prager and Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro. You're gonna have a lot of company in the afterlife. And maybe even in Judgment Day. Oh yeah, especially Judgment Day.
Well, let's take hell. Hell isn't as bad as it's cracked up to be. What? No, you see, the thing about heaven is that heaven is for people who like the sort of things that go on in heaven. Like, singing, talking to God, watering pot plants. Whereas hell, on the other hand, is for people who like the other sorts of things. Adultery, pillage, torture. Those areas.
Really?
Leave your lands to the crown, and once you're dead, you will have the time of your life.
Adultery, pillage, through all eternity?
Yep. Do it.